Should the United States provide the Ukrainian army weapons to fight off advances by Russian-backed militants? It's an argument that's recently involved all levels of American politics, from the White House to senators, from congressmen to the Pentagon. As opinion slowly sways in favour of supplying Ukrainian forces with lethal aid, President Barack Obama is left with a tough choice. Go with public opinion or hold off from potentially fueling the flames of a conflict that's already claimed thousands of lives. Wesley Clark, a former commander of the US Army in Europe who has vast experience in dealing with Russian military officials, told Ukrainian news agency TSN that Ukraine should not solely rely on weapons to resolve the conflict in Ukraine, and that Russia does have advantages on the battlefield, although the fighters lack experience.
They have good basic equipment. I think it's well adapted to the terrain in which they're operating in eastern Ukraine. I think their training indicates that, thus far at least, that they're not that well trained.
Other political analysts argue that deploying weapons across the Atlantic could put off Vladimir Putin from deploying more soldiers and heavy weapons to capture more territory from Ukrainian forces.
Putin sends more Russian troops into Ukraine. Ukraine needs to send more body bags back to Russia. Because we've learned that Putin is very sensitive about casualties. He tries to prevent journalists from reporting on Russian casualties. He goes after the Soldiers' Mothers Committee. He's very sensitive about it because Russians do not want casualties as a result of fighting in Ukraine. Right. And the way to prevent Putin from further invasion into Ukraine is to enable the Ukrainians to defend their own territory.
Both the House and Senate passed the Ukrainian Freedom Support Act in late December, paving the way for $350 million worth in lethal and non-lethal military assistance, a rare agreement in the usually divided Congress. Despite Barack Obama signing the act, Kramer says politicians in Washington continue to send mixed signals to one another.
That we don't know what the policy is. Terrible confusion on such an important issue. And yet you have the Congress on a bipartisan basis calling for military assistance. You have Ukrainians calling for military assistance. And you have our NATO allies who will not provide the assistance as long as the United States is opposed to it. This is a decision the President of the United States needs to make, and he needs to make it. He should have made it months ago, but he needs to make it today.
The debate over weapons has strained the united front between the US and its European allies of providing weapons to Ukraine, with many EU leaders arguing there is no military solution to the conflict. However, if peace talks organised for Wednesday in the Belarusian capital Minsk failed to make a breakthrough, the argument for providing weapons to Ukraine could gain further traction 8,000 kilometres across the Atlantic.